I remember growing up and hearing people say, like, this is grown folks' business. What they are doing is they're setting boundaries to say, stay out of what I'm doing, whether it's right or whether it's wrong. Right. It doesn't concern you. And really, ultimately, we end up living in disobedience and then teaching our children, the next generation, this is how you cut corners and this is how you have a half-hearted relationship with God and with that person.
Right.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Beautifully Blended Podcast. I am Larry.
And I'm Julia.
And we are passionate about helping one blended family at a time, one marriage at a time, to find help, hope, and to find healing. We are at it again. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us today. We got a really good topic for you.
We do.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Listen.
This is one of those topics where, you may not like us when we're done.
It's okay. We're here to tell truth.
It's real, though.
It is real.
It's real. And we want to be real. Mm-hmm. We want to help you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, people want the results of help, but they don't want to go through the process of help.
Right.
Why don't you tell the people what we're here for? Like, why we come today? What we doing?
All right. So today we're diving into the topic that affects a lot of families, and that is choosing to live together unmarried, especially when children are involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's ouch already.
Yeah. So we call that playing house.
Yeah. Quit playing house.
Listen, you took my words.
Oh, say it.
Stop playing house. Go ahead.
No, it's important.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so here's the thing. As Christians, we believe that marriage is foundational, and we know that it's foundational. We know that it's covenantal. We know that God created it for a purpose, and we know that there's a blessing for those who commit to come together and say, we want to live in a way that honors God. Mm-hmm. We want to live in a way that pleases Him.
Right.
When we give our lives to Him and when we say, I want to become a follower of Jesus Christ, and we put our faith in Him, everything changes. Part of what changes is our commitment in relationships. We level it up and we say, you know what, we're just not going to hang out and you come over my house and I'll come over your house and then, we do all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But we make a different type of commitment when it comes to relationships, and that commitment looks like marriage. It's biblical marriage, and it matters. It's important.
Right.
Yep.
So today we're going to talk about 3 key reasons why choosing marriage over cohabitation matters.
Right.
So let's jump into one of them. Just the understanding, this is what we know, that the foundation that you set in your relationship really does impact your family. It impacts your children. It impacts their future. Yep. There's nothing that you're doing right now that's not impacting them in some kind of way, for the good or for the bad. Right. There's nothing that you're doing. So when we start from that perspective, it helps us understand as we're taking steps into this conversation, why we're even talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of put out there, we don't think you're a bad person if you live with someone.
No, we're not saying that.
Yeah, we're not saying that. We don't think that, you're, inherently evil and, all bad things are going to happen to you. And we get situations happen. Right. Excuse me. We get that life happens. We get that sometimes you find yourself, what they used to say growing up in church, sin will take you further than you wanted to go. It will cost you more than you wanted to pay, and it will keep you longer than you wanted to stay. And we know that in our own personal lives, before Christ, we made decisions that we had to deal with the consequences of.
Right.
You and I, we didn't live together before we got married. We were engaged for a short time. We weren't engaged for a really long. How long were we engaged?
Not even a year.
Okay, yeah, I knew it was less than a year.
But we dated. We just weren't engaged that whole time.
Right. So, being in a relationship, it can be complicated because you give yourself to someone and you're like, well, I really love you. And then it's just like, okay, I want to be with you. I want to spend time with you. Then you may end up having children together and it's out of wedlock and you got to deal with all the things that come along with that,
Right.
People may say certain things or you may have created this defense mechanism where you just like, I don't care what nobody says about nothing. This is my life and I'm going to do what I want to do, which don't do that.
Don't do
That's
that.
not a good idea. Sometimes we can hear a hard truth when it comes to relationships and being in a relationship that we may have been in for quite some time and we won't like what that truth has to say.
Right.
Sometimes we feel like it's an indictment on us, or we throw around this phrase, quit judging me. And that has become probably one of the most popular phrases that has been weaponized against anybody who does what we don't want them to do.
Right.
Anyone who tells us that we're wrong, we say, don't judge me.
Right.
And I feel like it is fitting for this episode.
Yeah.
People find themselves in situations that maybe they didn't plan on.
Yeah.
But they drift. They drift
Right.
through a series of decisions that maybe you didn't intentionally have some intentionality behind, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a place where you and your boo are living together, and what the old saints used to say was shacking up, and you find your place. You find yourself in a place where y'all are living together, and all of a sudden, what used to convict you becomes real easy to do now. It becomes very simple, and you start sharing bills. You start sharing responsibilities. It starts with, I'm not going to sleep here because I don't want the kids to see me, but then all of a sudden it's just like, what you doing with my toothbrush?
Right.
Like it's a whole nother world now.
Whole other world.
Because you begin to drift, you get more relaxed, and all of a sudden you find yourself, you and your partner living together. Your boyfriend, you're living with your boyfriend, or you're living with your girlfriend, you have kids, and now it's just like, I love the Lord. I've given my heart to him. What should I do about this situation? Right.
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen, because that is so prevalent and so popular, we have seen how the number of unmarried partners living together has tripled in the last 2 decades. Did you see that?
It increased.
Yeah, it's not just doubled, it tripled in the last 2 decades. I mean, from 6 million to 17 million.
Yeah.
That's a huge number.
Yeah. 6 million was a big number, but 17 million people, and that's according to the census.gov website.
Right. And again, that's not an indictment on people, but we're here to tell truth.
Right.
And truth isn't based on perspective.
Right.
And it's not based on opinion.
Right.
Truth is something that's grounded and stable. And so even the truth of the numbers is something that we're sharing.
Right.
So there's a whole segment of people who are living in that way. And again, we're not coming at people, but we're telling the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, and the reality of this is marriage was God's idea.
Yes.
Let's talk about that in the book of Genesis.
I mean, Genesis, we see Adam and Eve and how God brought them together. So marriage is God's idea.
Yeah.
It's not something that the state created. It's not something that the government created. It's something that God created.
Yes.
And so he gives us the prescription. He's the originator of it. So he gives us, this is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Relationship and community are important to him because that's what he built. That's what he created. And so we see that in Genesis 3.
Yep.
The primary relationship that any individual has is with God, and next is with their spouse.
Yep.
Right? And so Adam and Eve, their relationship with each other came only second to God.
Right.
And so when you look at relationships from that perspective, the reason this matters is because, and we talked about this in a previous episode about how marriage is the foundation for your family.
Yep. Yeah, so we want to talk about right now some of the reasons why playing house becomes a problem,
Yeah.
in particular in the life of a Christian,
Right.
and how it affects you long term.
Absolutely.
One of the issues with playing house, living with someone, and you have children and you're not married, one of the issues is you are misaligned with the design of God.
Right.
Like we talked about from Genesis 3, how marriage was God's idea. He originated it. So we are now choosing to engage in an intimate relationship,
Right.
and we're choosing to do that outside of God's alignment. Like we're not
Right.
aligning ourselves to the will of God. We're not aligning ourselves to His ways and how He has
Absolutely.
prescribed for humanity to live in an intimate relationship. And one of the issues with a misalignment, if you think about it from a medical perspective, when your back is not aligned, it's misaligned, you're going to have pain.
Yeah.
You're gonna maybe lose your balance.
Yeah.
There are going to be things that will potentially get worse in your health if your back is not in alignment.
Right.
But the same thing is true in relationships.
Right.
And how we are supposed to align every aspect of our lives to the will of God, not our will, but to God's will. And
Right.
if an intimate relationship is not aligned
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
how God has created us, we are going to experience pain.
Yeah, we are.
We are going to experience problems, and we may not be able to articulate or identify why are there problems in our relationship.
Right.
Why are we struggling in our relationship in this way?
Right.
And we have become so used to just living with our best friend, or living with our boyfriend,
Right.
or living with our girlfriend, that we no longer even consider, maybe I need to make some adjustments because I am a child of God, because I am a Christian, and because I believe that God's ways are true and right. Maybe it's time for me to make some adjustments in my life
Right.
to align myself up with God's will.
In these situations where you're playing house and you have
Yeah.
kids involved, one of the things that you have to look at is the fact that those kids are watching you.
Right.
And if you profess to be a Christian and then tell your kids they have to be obedient, they have to follow the rules,
Right.
and you are not following the rules,
Yeah.
you're going to have a misalignment in your home.
Right.
Right? And so that misalignment really starts with you. I am not guaranteeing, because we can't and we know that's not true, that just because as a parent you
Right.
are aligned with God's word and His will and the plan and all the things doesn't mean that your kids won't,
Right.
be disobedient and out of order. But you don't have as much of a leg to stand on
Yeah.
as you're trying to enforce
Right.
obedience and following
Yeah.
directions when you are out of line.
Right.
So that's another reason, to your point with the misalignment. Your
Yeah.
kids know when things are out of whack.
Yeah.
They know that they're not living together. You never know
Right.
what impact it's making. So you want to
Right.
make sure that you're aligned, because that does affect your kids.
It does. You're almost teaching them how to cut corners.
Yeah.
You're showing them how to cut corners and say, okay, well, this is okay, how to justify.
Right.
Right? And that's the
Right.
last thing you want to teach
Oh
your
my
kids how to do,
gosh.
how to justify.
Because they're already pros at sin.
Right.
Like,
So,
they already know.
You teach them how to justify behavior and have a reason. I remember growing up and hearing people say, like, this is grown folks' business. Well, when you make a statement like you remember that.
I mean,
You said it, didn't you?
I did.
Lord have mercy. So when
Just
people
get out grown folks conversations. That's what I would have said. But go ahead.
so when people misuse that, I'll say that.
Okay.
I'll assume that you used it right. But when people misuse that,
Yeah.
what they are doing is they're setting boundaries to say, what I'm doing doesn't concern you.
Yeah.
Stay out of what I'm doing, whether it's right or whether it's wrong.
Right.
It doesn't concern you. I want you to stay out of my business because I'm an adult. And we feel like being an adult or being grown, whether you say I'm a grown woman or I'm a grown man, we feel like it gives us the right to make our own rules. And really, ultimately, we end up living in disobedience and then teaching our children, the next generation, this is how you cut corners and this is how you have a half-hearted relationship
Right.
with God and with that person.
Right. Right. I mean, let's remember for those who can remember this, because I remember hearing this, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Let's remember how we felt about that. Let's remember.
Go back in your mind.
Yes, go back. Let's just take a
Right.
step back through memory lane and remember how that impacted us. And so
Yeah.
let's consider that we don't want to model that
Right.
whole idea of do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Right. And so that's that misalignment. And we want to get aligned.
Yeah. One of the things that we have to think about and ask yourself if you are in that situation, knowing that marriage is a covenant between one man and woman, and knowing that that is a covenant where God is in the midst, he ordained it, you have to ask yourself, are you going to choose covenant or cohabitation? Like which is the
Yeah.
one you are going
Yeah.
to choose? Are you going to choose to be in covenant with God, a God who loves you, a God who has cared for you, a God who has saved you from the world of sin that you used to be in, just wrongdoing? He has protected you. He has kept you safe. Are you going to choose covenant or cohabitation? And a lot of times that is a hard choice
Right.
for some people to make because they got feelings involved.
Right.
And we share the Netflix account, and what we supposed to do? Netflix has
stop.
clamped down, and we
Netflix.
can't do
share-
it.
right.
You get what I'm saying?
I do.
So they bring up these reasons why we
Right.
have to live together. We have heard some of the craziest reasons why people said, well, I got to live together because I got to take the kids to school. You mean in a car? Because that car has the ability to drive from one house to another house.
does.
Or we can make up reasons.
Right.
But really, again, going back to what I said before, we are
Right.
teaching our kids how to justify
Right.
behavior.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree.
So let's look at what Genesis says. Genesis 2:24 says this. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. It is very possible, because we don't acknowledge and recognize that covenant,
Right.
that our relationship is misaligned and we are dealing with problems and don't even recognize that's the reason why we're dealing with those problems.
Right.
We're misaligned. Some of you need to get back in alignment.
Right.
You need to get back in alignment with God. You need to get back in alignment with your church. You need to get back in alignment, some of you have broken really good relationships, even with your parents, because you chose to be with this man or you chose to be with this woman. Just like, well, they love me and he bought me lamps, and only someone who really loves you will buy you the best lamps. Listen,
Lamps.
I mean, that's what came to mind.
Okay.
People do buy lamps.
People do. You're right.
We have broken important relationships
Right.
to choose cohabitation rather than covenant.
Right. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I would say the second thing would be a lack of covenant commitment. Now, I had a conversation with some young ladies several months ago. It was a singles fellowship or a young adults. I don't know. It was something. Or a women's event. And in the conversation, we were talking about marriage and submission and those kinds of things. And it's like, well, I have never seen that, and that's not my place, and I don't know how to do that.
Wait, never seen what?
They had not experienced a healthy biblical marriage where the husband is loving his wife like Christ loved the church, and the wife is submitting to her husband as unto the Lord. So they hadn't seen that, right? And so you may have had a lack of seeing a covenant relationship and what that looks like, but that is not the excuse,
Right.
and we can't lean into that,
Right.
because God doesn't call us to do the things he's called us to do because we've always seen those things lived out. He calls us to do those things because he's given us the command to do it, and he's given us the ability to do it. So not understanding a covenant commitment and what that means. A marriage is a covenant promise, not just between these two people, but ultimately to God.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you make that choice, you make that covenant with that person, that means like everything.
Yeah.
Right? And
Right.
so if you don't have that covenant relationship, that covenant commitment to the person that you're living with, then it can lead you down this road and cause you a whole lot more problems.
Right.
You know, there's not this commitment. And I've even heard people, whether they were Christians or non-Christians, who said once they lived together and then once they got married, it changed everything. Well, yeah, because now you're making a commitment. Before, you could take your toothbrush and go whenever you wanted.
Right.
Right? And splitting up your things was a lot easier.
They fit in the box.
They fit.
Give me my box. I'm out of here. Right.
But this covenant relationship matters.
Yeah.
And that commitment means everything. Without that, there's this lack of like spiritual and emotional depth that you can have in this relationship because that covenant is binding.
Yeah.
And it is everything.
Right. I agree. I think you people who, again, they're nice people who live together.
Right. They're nice.
We're not saying that they are mean. But one of the deficiencies in doing that is you are diluting this idea of commitment. And it's almost like you're changing the definition of it to suit you. It's commitment has a lower definition in this context because this is what suits me.
Right.
So the problem with that is you cannot have a high commitment in one area and a low commitment in another area and kind of live your life uneven.
Yeah.
Like if you are uncommitted in a relationship, you're going to be uncommitted to the gym, or you're going to be uncommitted in your finances, or you're going to be uncommitted to your children, and one of your kids may live somewhere else, because we are talking about blended families.
We are.
Sometimes we'll spend more time with the children, the kids that are closest to us within our proximity, spend less time with the kids who are further away. But we struggle with the commitment part of it.
Right.
So, I mean, I would want to encourage anyone who is watching, when we talk about playing house and we talk about living together and without being married, look at that word commitment, look at that word covenant and say, okay, is there something in me that is afraid to commit?
Right.
Is there something in me that is extremely fearful about actually taking that next step?
Right.
Now, the second question you need to ask yourself, not just is that person worth it, it's also, is me following the plan of God enough for me to say, I'm going to do whatever he wants me to do. If he wants me to do this, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to trust him. You said something earlier about the students, from the young students that you were talking about, how they said, I've never seen a healthy marriage or relationship before.
Right.
As believers, we are called to walk by faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not by sight. Right. Abraham never saw the land that God brought him out in Genesis 12. He said, I want you to leave your father's house, your mother's house, go to a land that I will show you.
Right.
He never saw the land.
Right.
He didn't know if the land existed.
Right.
He didn't know if he was supposed to bring a jacket. He never, he never saw the land.
Right.
But by faith,
Yep.
he took a step out and he said, I'm going to do what God has called me to do.
Absolutely.
And some of you who are watching, you need to take a step of faith and do what God wants you to do. Live how he wants you to live. Sometimes we live in this mediocre existence for far too long, and we get so comfortable being mediocre. No, if God has called you to be one of his sons and daughters, then your life now belongs to him.
Right.
Therefore, if you are living in a situation where you are living with somebody, you need to go to God and say, God, whatever you want me to do in this situation, I'm willing to do it because I ultimately want to please you.
I love that. And when you said that, something else I thought about was we need to look for creative ways. God can give us creativity when it comes to how to walk this out. So sometimes we kind of stop with the path of least resistance, right? And so because in our culture, and we just did the numbers, 6 million to 17 million.
Right. People are living together.
Right. That has become the path of least resistance.
Right.
And we have different reasons why we're doing it, right? But there's creativity in how to figure out life so that you don't live together. And God can give you the creativity. Go get wisdom and counsel, because you could come up with a strategy. If this is someone that you believe you want to marry, then there's some creativity that God can give you so that you can resolve some of those issues that you feel like prevent you from doing that, prevent you from living in separate houses, prevent you from, sleeping over to a certain point, then leave it in the morning or what before the kids get up. There's creativity. And so don't stop in the first thought that comes to your mind, which again is the path of least resistance. God can give you creativity in a way to do that. So the same way you go to him and ask for wisdom, pray and believe that he can give you creativity and a solution as far as how to walk that out.
Yeah. No, he can do it, and we got to be open to that.
We do.
We're not saying it's easy. No. We're not saying it's easy. And again, this is not an indictment. However, we are being clear that in Genesis 3, this is what God created. He created marriage. Some things in our lives, because they become so complicated, need to be undone.
Yeah.
They need to be undone. Adult learning, most of it is unlearning.
Yeah.
You're unlearning, bad habits. You're dealing with the consequences of decisions that you made and trying to figure out, how do I undo this?
Right.
How do I undo this?
Right.
And there's several things that you can do to undo some of the consequences, but we don't want you to give up. We don't want you to stop trying. We don't want you to not be prayerful. We want you to be bold and have a conversation with a pastor or a friend and say, I'm in a situation, we are in an entanglement, right? We are entangled in this, situation, and it is a predicament.
Yes.
What should I do to get out of this so that I can honor God with my life? And I think the problem with so many people is they don't want to ask that question.
You're right.
Because they're afraid of the answer.
Right. I agree.
They're afraid of the answer.
Sometimes I call it a situationship.
Yeah, it is a situationship.
But yeah, they're afraid of the answer. They don't. You feel like you've already been down that road. Like, well, this is the only thing that I can do because this, and this. And it's like, okay, but be creative.
And then I think also because it's so common.
It is.
Because it's so common, it's like, okay, what's wrong with this?
Right.
What's wrong with this? I mean, my uncle did it, my aunt did it, my dad did it, my mom did it, my sister did it. Everyone's doing it.
People who graduated high school did it, so what's the big deal? Right,
they minimize it. But the big deal is the fact that as a Christian, as a believer, God created a system and a pattern for intimacy in relationships.
Right.
And that is the covenant relationship of marriage.
Absolutely. Well, I would say the third issue is just the impact on children's understanding of what biblical values mean. Yeah,
the scripture says in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart. That is the responsibility
of every parent. Yeah, I mean, we've said it over and over again, and so it just bears repeating that kids are watching. Yeah, they are observing, and they're going to model whatever we show them.
Right.
And so we need to be mindful of that. And I talked about that before, about how earlier, just a few moments ago, I talked about how you want your kids to be obedient, but you're doing the whole "do as I say, not as I do."
Right.
And so your kids can turn around and be like, well, Mom or Dad, you said, but then you're doing this.
Right.
So you can't have it both ways.
No, you
really can't. And we want them, oftentimes we want to raise our kids to have good morals. We want them to have values. We want them to know right from wrong.
Right.
There are very few parents that I've ever heard of, and I'm just going to say very few because I would say none, but I would say very few who would say, I want my kids to do the wrong things, and I'm okay with that.
Right.
I want them to have no boundaries. I don't want them to have values. There's very few people who would say that. And so we got to model that and allow them to see a God-centered marriage is what they want to shoot for. That's their goal.
Absolutely.
If you get into a relationship with
So
someone,
good.
this is your goal. You want to get into a God-honoring marriage. Right?
Yeah.
And let's model that before them.
Right. And this is not about perfection.
No.
This is not like we have arrived or, Christians all over the world are living perfect lives and you need to catch up to them.
They're not. That's
They're
why we
not.
got Jesus.
And we're not.
No.
That's why we need help.
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
We need to learn to be honest. And the scripture tells us in Ephesians 6:4, it says, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord, which means you have a responsibility. We have a responsibility not just to procreate, but after procreation, we have a responsibility to disciple the kids that we brought into this world. Our responsibility is not just to provide cereal in the morning, pack lunch, and then provide dinner in the evening and make sure they got school clothes every year. Our responsibility is also what Scripture is telling us, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. There needs to be a plan in place. There needs to be a plan with the father and the mother to say, okay, how are we going to bring them up in the instruction of the Lord? And one way to do that is to model for them, this is what a relationship with God requires. It requires a sacrifice. And your mom and I are going to put down our individual agendas. We're going to get married because it's the right thing to do. And we want you to be able to see what it looks like to be in a real covenant marriage. Maybe you haven't seen it before, but watch us. We'll show you what that looks like. And that's really what needs to happen in the lives of these kids.
Absolutely.
You said, real quick, you said how they are watching us. And I'm thinking like they're not just watching us. This is a technology age.
It is.
They are watching us and they are able to say, okay, Chat GPT, what does it mean when mommy says this and she does this? I promise you it's going to say the definition of hypocrite is, and so it's not like we are hiding from truth.
No, it's right there. I mean, the same way you can say, don't do this, don't do that. But your kids could end up saying, but I see the cigarettes, but I see the alcohol that you hid under the couch. Like I see you telling me not to, but you do it. I see, And so it's the same thing when it comes to this relationship. We have to be mindful that they're watching.
And again, it's not about perfection.
No.
I remember hearing Craig Rochelle say, it's not about perfection, it's about progress.
Absolutely.
Like, what does it look like to do something different tomorrow than what you did today?
Yep.
Like, what does progress look like in a situation where you are living with someone and neither one of you are married? Yep. What does progress look like for you in that situation?
Absolutely. Yep. So then the question becomes, what are the messages that our children are learning about love and commitment? And again, we talked about that. And again, we want them to learn not perfection, but progress. We want them to learn that we just keep trying. You know, one of the things that we can teach our kids is when we mess up, we fess up.
Yeah.
Right? And so this idea that, you know what, mommy and daddy, we were not doing this correctly.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
huge.
now we're going to do it this way because we have committed to God. Like you have that conversation.
Huge.
That goes a long way because now your kids see, oh yeah, they know you're not perfect.
Right.
Like it's not news.
Right.
So if you admit that, they're like, oh, okay.
And she's honest.
Right. And you're modeling.
And he's honest.
Right. And you're modeling for them what you do when you go the wrong way, you turn. What do you do when you mess up? You fess up. You say, you know what? I messed up. I shouldn't have done it this way. We're going to go in this direction. Right. And so the more that we do that, the better it is for our kids because they will learn that.
Yeah, I agree. Let's wrap this up. We'll give 3 practical takeaways that I believe are essential for anyone who may find yourself in this position and you're like, okay, what do I do? So the first thing we want to encourage you to do is pray together as a couple, seek guidance from God, from the scriptures, even from others, like how should I handle this and how can I undo this? Pray and ask God to help you.
Right.
We say that regularly because we know that we are limited in our ability to figure things out, but God has ultimate wisdom.
Absolutely.
He is not, he does not run out of wisdom. He knows exactly what to do in a situation like this. So my encouragement for you, if you are in this situation, is be bold enough and humble enough to hold the hand of the person you're in a relationship with and say, you know what, we cannot go further. Not one step further like this. Let's pray about this.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say the second thing is, again, we've been talking about it. Just consider how our choices impact our children and even their worldview, right? If we're out of alignment with God, it can impact them. So we have to figure out how that impacts them.
For sure. The third thing is, if you're living together, take steps toward honoring God. His design through marriage. Go to counseling, meet with a pastor, meet with a spiritual pastor, like one who knows the Bible.
Yes.
And believes it and lives it out. Meet with someone who has a healthy marriage and have a real conversation with them.
Yeah.
Have a real conversation and say, look, you are there, I am here. How do I get there?
Right.
Just that simple.
Yep.
You are over there and I see the results in your life. I'm over here. This is a ball of mess. This is just crazy in my life.
Right.
We're living together and we're paying bills and it's hard and it's just not right. How do I get from where I am to where you are?
Right.
Have that conversation.
Right. So we just want to remember that marriage is God's design.
Yeah.
Right. And because it's his design, it's for the two of you to build a legacy of faith and love and hope in your family.
Yeah.
And so, make sure that you're doing it God's way.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the bottom line. You know, it's easy to get trapped in a routine and it may not be, the best routine for you. And you find yourself there, but you don't have to stay there.
No.
You don't have to stay there. There is a way out. So we want to encourage you, be bold, find the way out. Think about the things that we talked about today.
Right.
Listen to the episode again, share it with someone because I think this conversation could help someone who is in that situation.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Beautifully Blended podcast. If this content was helpful, share it, like it.
Yes.
Go to YouTube and like our page.
Yes, subscribe.
I said the wrong word. Subscribe to our YouTube page. We want to be a blessing to other people. We want to help people who are looking for help.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being part of our community. Thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you next time.